Hi, everybody, and welcome to Thriving LDS Singles podcast. We're excited you're here today. And as you can see, I'm in a different place. That's the joy. We can share and do things no matter where we are. So today we have two guests. Oh, so sorry. Hi to my co-host, Kim.
Hi, I'm in the same old place.
Same old place of Arizona. Sometimes she's in Utah, but today she's in Arizona. And today we have two guests with us. We have Amber. Hi, Amber.
Hello.
And we have Robert. Hi, Robert.
Hi. How are you?
Hi. And we're so glad they're able to join us. So Amber is coming to us from, no, I don't know where you are, Amber. I've got all these things of Washington and Spain. So she was born in Idaho. Both of these guys are country people by heart. Amber's born in Idaho. She's been in Spokane, Washington and California. And where are you now?
Currently living in Holiday, Utah.
Holiday, Utah. She's got a degree in psychology and she works in mental health. And we're going to hear a bit of her story in a minute. And so Robert's also, he was born in Oregon and he now lives in Dallas. And in between, he's been in Salt Lake City as a professor at BYU, and he also was a professor at BYU Hawaii, which I actually think would be a lovely place to work. But he was married for 14 years with two boys and is now a retired BYU professor, but he's really a fun boy at heart. So we'll start with Amber.
Hey, let me just, it's actually, I think, was it 40 years? 40 years. Yeah, he said 14, but
Oh, did I?
I know you meant 40, so we thought we should clear that up.
40. I read 40. Long time.
That's right.
So we'll hear a bit more of your story. We'll start with Amber's story. So Amber, can you tell us a little bit about your story? Oh, wait. So sorry. Yep, stop.
It's okay.
So today's topic, we're going to talk about grief, and specifically grief of losing a child. So this is a unique form of grief that most of us really don't want to go through, but unfortunately it is one of the realities of life. Both Kim and I haven't experienced this specifically, although I lost a baby in utero at 20 weeks. And so that in itself was devastating enough. So I can't imagine what it's like to lose an older child. So Amber, tell us a little bit about your story.
Okay. Well, thanks for having me on. Glad to be a guest on your
Thanks for
podcast
coming
today.
because I know this is a really brave topic to cover, a hard topic, and I really value both of you for coming on. So
yeah. Thank you, Kim. So my story is I was living in California, got married in 1995, got married in the Oakland Temple. We moved around quite a bit, and in the process we had 4 sons. So never thought I'd be a mother of all these boys, and I came from a family of mostly girls with one brother. So it was a learning curve for me. These rambunctious little boys, amazing boys. So definitely was an adventure raising these kids. I was lucky enough that I was able to be a stay-at-home mom and be with those kids through the majority of their growing up years. Always will be grateful for that. So we moved to Utah in 2009. My oldest was in 5th grade. The next one was in 3rd. That was Nicholas. Tyler was not, I think he was 4. And then my youngest Matthew was still just a little toddler. So we were so happy. Moving here. Utah's a great family place. We were having some great experiences. Life seemed to be going okay. It was not perfect by any stretch. But I thought we're doing the best we can, trying to figure it out. No kids come with a rule book, right? So my son, Nicholas, my second child, he did struggle quite a bit in school. He was really smart kid, but just could not focus. It was a lot of it for him was if he was very passionate about something, he was intensely focused. He read books that way beyond my comprehension. Really smart kid. But man, school was a struggle and it was a battle. Every semester trying to just keep his grades up, and we tried all the rewards, the punishments, the everything. And so he made it to his senior year, and man, that was a tough one too. I was like, okay, we're about to get this diploma, things are going to be good. We're going to get this figured out. And it was a lot of work, but he graduated in May of 2020. And that was the COVID year. If you guys remember, the world was locked down. Kids were all home doing online school. So it was definitely an interesting situation, but we got him graduated. And he was working a part-time job at Great Harvest, and he loved working there, loved the people he worked with. And I'm pausing for just a second, so maybe edit this part out. Sorry, you get a little overwhelmed. Sorry, I lost my train of thought there for a second because the emotions were coming. Okay. All right. Okay. So Nick was working this part-time job at Great Harvest, and he had decided he was going to do this coding boot camp, and he was very excited about that, had saved up money to do it. And I was really excited for him because now being out of school, he could chart his own course. I'm like, you can do what you want now. You've got your diploma. Now it's up to you. You can choose your path. And I was really excited for him. I actually was really excited to see what he would do because he was a pretty bright kid. So it was July, and my friends had actually planned a get together. We get together every year, my high school friends. And it was hard to pull off because it was COVID, but we were able to figure something out. I flew out to California July 20th. Before I left, I gave all my kids a hug and told them goodbye, loved them. Got to California, was ready to have a fun few days with my girlfriends. And we were up in Shasta. So we're up there, and first night we're having fun. We go to bed that night. And when I woke up, my friends were actually all sitting at the foot of my bed crying. And I didn't know what was going on. And they said, your husband is going to be calling you with some difficult news. And I was like, what? Like, I mean, obviously something was wrong. And I begged him, just tell me, because I wasn't going to sit there with them crying. And they told me that my son Nicholas had taken his life and was no longer with us. And then my husband did call shortly after that and confirmed that was what had happened. So it's hard to remember exactly what happened after that. I know I was screaming. I went into the bathroom. I know I was sitting by the toilet, but somehow my friends got me dressed and I was on a plane. My sister flew back with me and made it back to Salt Lake shortly after there, as soon as I could. And that next week is also a blur. I wouldn't go in the house. We stayed in a hotel room the first week. And my whole family came out. I remember driving down to my sister's just because we were gathering for support. And when I pulled up to her house, there was all these cars, license plates from California and everywhere. And my entire family had come out. Everyone dropped everything and was there, and I'll never forget that. Anyway, so that is the story of what happened. And that's how I lost my son. It was probably, I don't know. It's very, very difficult. It was so unexpected, not where I thought his mindset was. And so.
Wow.
Thank you for
so
sharing.
much. Yeah.
Yeah.
And of course we want to hear a little more of how that impacted you and kind of how you navigated your way through such a horrendous thing. But let's switch over to Rob now, Rob, and see if you don't mind sharing for a little bit about your background and your loss.
Well, let me say first, Amber, I'm so sorry to hear your story. I can't imagine what it would be like to go through that with finding out that your son had taken his life.
Thank you.
And it hasn't been that long. You know, some people might look at that and say, 4 years. That's a long time. But I know from my experience, that's not a long time at all. And so I can understand how your emotions are close to your surface. Well, I was born in a little town called Pendleton, Oregon. Over there on the east side, actually only just a couple of 100 miles, maybe at most, from Spokane, Washington, where Amber was born. And I lived there till I was 13 and then moved with my family to Utah. My father had taken a government position in Vietnam. It was during the Vietnam War, and so he wanted us to, or my mother wanted us to be close to her family in Salt Lake City. I had 3 older brothers and sisters. I have 7 siblings, and 3 of the older ones were attending BYU in Provo at the time. So we did that. Anyway, I, among other things, went to 11 different schools growing up, K through 12, and that was a lot of fun, going from place to place to place and being a stranger and meeting new people. But eventually I did start at BYU, interrupted that, went on a mission to Japan for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Then got back home and attended BYU again and graduated from there. Somehow they gave me a piece of paper and I moved on with my life with a diploma. I have done, I've basically been in the public relations reputation management field for most of my career for some 40 years. And most of that, well, the last 25 years of that was global, looking at how international and global corporations managed and built personnel and structures to properly manage, anticipate and manage crises that might come up and build relationships that would hopefully help avoid those crises in the first place or have friends when they happen. I was married in 1982 in the Salt Lake City temple. We were not able to have children on our own. We adopted 2 boys. The oldest we got when he was 3 days old, and the second one was 2 months old. And that one we got, I'd been working in Salt Lake City with Salt Lake City School District for 7 years. And then I went to grad school and ended up at the University of Maryland there in College Park in Washington, DC area, basically. And that's where we got our youngest son, and we feel both of those were miracles for us. So I continued to work. I ultimately finished all my coursework at the University of Maryland, and then right at that time got a job offer to be a global public relations director for Nu Skin in Provo. And it was going global, going international at the time. And my vice president knew that I had a lot of background in global PR. And so he asked me to come back, and I did, and somehow managed to. I worked there for about 6 years and then left to finish my PhD, which I did in 1987, I think, I believe. Kept working for a while, and then did a lot of consulting and things like that. Then got a job offer at Brigham Young University of Hawaii. I was not a professor. I mean, I taught classes, but I was technically not a professor there. I was the director of public relations for the university, and did that for about 6 years in the early 2000s. Then went back to Brigham Young University. We moved back to Provo. We left Hawaii in December, which was crazy, and moved back to Provo, and I taught there for about 14 years. My oldest son had moved to Dallas, and so I retired 3 years early, and we came here. Meanwhile, 10 years ago, 10 summers ago, my youngest, who was then almost 23, he was 22 years old, went to the dentist for some oral surgery, and never came out of that dentist chair alive. Well, he was technically alive, but he spent 2 days in ICU, and then they declared him as deceased. He had his back molars pulled, and he was under anesthesia and on his way out. We still to this day don't know exactly what happened. We've never been allowed to know, frankly, which I find a little bit disgusting that the system would keep parents from knowing that. And he somehow, we don't know if he caused it or if it was a reaction, but he kind of gagged and choked a little bit. And the gauze had either gone down or was going down his windpipe, and he suffocated. And I was in the lobby at the time, and I heard EMT people come in an ambulance. I thought, this is crazy. They ran through the lobby, and a worker came out from the back and motioned to another man who was in the lobby and said, come here, come here. And I thought, well, sorry for that guy. About 10 more minutes went past, and I heard a rumbling down the hall. I saw 3 EMT people bent over a gurney. I could not see the face. They were pounding on his bare chest, but I instantly knew it was my son. I stood up immediately and asked what was going on, and he asked if I was the father, and I said yes. He said, your son has been in full cardiac arrest for 25 minutes. I found out later it took them 19 minutes before they ever called 911. And so they took him to Utah Valley Medical Center, and he was in ICU for 2 days and hooked up to all kinds of equipment. It was hard to see him there. And ultimately they put him out of his induced coma and tried to wake him up, and he was gone. And so that was a pretty sudden loss for us. Like I said, that was 10 years ago. And the grief was horrific at first. It still is not quite as bad. It's softened over the years. But there are still days, Amber, I'm sure you know this. There are still days when I just break down, almost for no reason, a reason I don't understand. The emotions just well up, and I break down. That has been compounded over the years. It was about 7 years, I believe, about 7 years after Jared, my son, died, that my wife decided to divorce me. Jared's death put a huge strain on our marriage. Certainly, we didn't have a perfect marriage. There were things going on, and I was doing things I shouldn't have been doing, and she was doing some things that she probably shouldn't have been doing. And once our son died, things just kind of spiraled downhill. We also retired, both of us. We moved to a completely new state. We moved out of a ward we'd been in for 2 decades and had a lot of friends that we left and moved to a new place and a new house, sold our house in Utah, and tried to assimilate into a new country called Texas. So here I am, alone in Dallas. My son is still here with our 4 grandchildren. She moved back to Utah and is there in Utah Valley. I rarely see my son and grandchildren. I talk to my son on the phone occasionally and text him a little bit more often. 2 days after my wife told me she was divorcing me, my son basically called me and basically said that I wouldn't be in his life for at least a year until he could figure things out. And so I wasn't. And even though I lived half hour from him, I didn't see him or my grandkids for over a year. And slowly but surely, those relationships are starting to rebuild. I'm kind of letting my son go at his timetable. And he's had some challenges himself with his family. And so there we are. That's kind of my background. Probably too long, too much, but there it is.
No, thank you for sharing, and it helps us to understand the whole story, and thank you. And it's in, like, I'm sure there's some research about the fact that, yeah, such a major incidence in life affects marriages. So both you and Amber have had that same experience of this, even though there's nothing to do with anybody else, it still impacts the marriage. Amber, do you tell us a little bit about that part of your story?
Yeah, so mine did happen quite a bit sooner after my son passed away. Sadly, it was just within hours of the funeral that my husband expressed he was no longer in love with me. I immediately went into I've got to save my family mode. We can't, like, we have to keep the family together. Like, we've just been through a tragedy. There's no way like we're gonna get divorced. Like, there's no way. And I went into full battle mode that I was gonna save the marriage. I did ask him to read a book with me. We did do that. Ultimately, it was not going to be saved. So it was probably maybe a month and a half to 2 months that we did finally just separate. Yeah, it was just not a good situation to be grieving the loss of a son and trying to fight for a marriage at the same time. It was way too much for me to try and do. And so I definitely had a lot of anxiety, a lot of fear. I did spend a lot of time up in Idaho at my parents' house, because that was like one place that was safe, where I'm like, okay, my parents have me. I can kind of just break down for a little bit here because they're here. But when I'm at home, it's me and my kids need me, and I had to be like on. I really couldn't shut down. And I know, like, I look back, I'm like, I know I didn't handle everything perfectly. Like I said earlier, there's no rule book on how you navigate that with your family. But there was significant loss. And it was, I think, how much later was it? Maybe another year and a half into the separation, there was more that came out about what was actually happening in the marriage. And without going into detail, there was another big loss as far as like coming to the realization that all the memories I had in this family I thought I had been building was not really what was happening. So again, it was a lot. I think I was talking to Kim earlier about this. I've known Kim for, gosh, 14 years.
Yeah.
Kim was my neighbor
Yeah.
here in Holiday.
Our boys actually used to spend time together. So
Yes. Yes, Kim's youngest and my son Nick they were pretty tight there. I think middle school age was when they were pretty close. They hung out quite a bit. They had a lot in common, I remember. So when I was talking to Kim about this, I said if I had been a corporation with all the loss that I had just taken on, I would have had to file for bankruptcy because it was a lot happening all at the same time. And you know, I was just I know I was in survival mode. A lot of people were like, maybe you should move up by your parents, and I considered a lot of it, but I was like, something's got to be stable right now. And my house is what I know, my neighbors, my ward at church. That's what I knew. So I was like, I can't upset things anymore right now. There's too much to work through. So I've stayed put, and I'm still in the same house. But but yeah, I'm definitely at this new phase. It's been quite the journey. I've learned a lot. I'm still not, I would not say I'm through the grief cycle all the way. I made a little graphic about kind of what I think the grief cycle looks like. Maybe you guys are familiar with that. I think it's the Kubler-Ross 5 steps of grief, or
5 stages of grief. Yeah.
5 stages of grief. Yes.
The denial, the anger,
yeah. So I don't know if that's something I could share. I'm not quite sure how to do that, but
yeah. So I know, Amber, you are an artist. I don't know
yeah.
if you want to admit that you're an artist, but I've seen your art and it's beautiful.
Thank you.
And I don't know if that came into play a lot. I know that in that your grieving process, and I think that happens a lot. I know Rob turned to poetry to help him manage his loss and his grief, or maybe poetry just called him, maybe is a better way to say it than him actually turning to it. But maybe we can stop for a minute. And Rob, do you mind sharing your poem that you wrote?
No, I would be glad to do that. I have to admit that your story in so many ways, Amber, sounds familiar to me because of some of the things that happened in my life as well, trying to save the marriage. But as for the poem, there's almost the story behind the poem is almost more important than the poem. If I may, we'll give a little background. About 1.5 years after my son died, I was talking to a friend and about what I thought was just normal part of life, normal things in life. And my friend all of a sudden stopped me and said, "Have you ever seen a grief counselor?" And I said, "No, I don't need to see a grief counselor." My friend said, "Yes, you do." So my son had been seeing a counselor. We've been seeing a counselor a little bit, and for my son, he had some things he was working through. Yeah. So I went to this counselor, and she helped a lot. And at one point, she said, "Well, Rob, you write a lot." For my career, I did a lot of different kinds of writing. But she said, "You need an outlet for your grief. You need something to blow off steam, to give you hope, to be creative and turn your attention away from the grieving. Have you ever done poetry?" Now I'm in my mid almost mid 60s at the time, early 60s. And I just laughed at her. I said, no, I've never done poetry. I think I tried to do a poem once when I was in high school, and I don't know what grade I got. It probably wasn't very good because none of my grades were that great. But anyway, she said, well, you might consider trying that. And I said, okay. I sloughed it off, and she went on with another topic. About 2 weeks later, I was depositioned by an attorney for a trial related to this death. And the deposition was awful. They asked me, well, you're not really grieving, are you? You go to church, you go to work every day, you do all this stuff, you're not doing any grieving. And then he asked me what happened that day. And I said, I remembered that. Well, actually, let me back up. When our son took off in the ambulance to ICU, he was in ICU for 2 days, and their insurance companies didn't pay a cent, nothing, and left our insurance company with this big bill. And so we decided that for several reasons, none of which was for us to gain any reward. It was all about other issues. We filed a lawsuit. And so this attorney was deposing me, and my attorney had asked me what happened that day. And I had 2 weeks later sat down and I wrote 10 pages, single spaced, of what happened and how I felt. And I gave it to my attorney and said, well, here, have this. I didn't realize that when that happens, it goes to the other attorneys as well. So when I'm being depositioned, he pulls out this 10-page document and said, you didn't write this, did you? Well, yes, I did. Are you sure you wrote it? Yes, I am. Every word? You didn't have help? Nobody colluded with you? That was the word he used. And I said, no, I wrote it myself. I'm a writer. That's what I do. He said, well, it looks like you certainly have at least edited it. And I said, no, not really. Maybe it changed a word or two, whatever. And he went on for 20 minutes challenging me. And I finally couldn't take it anymore. I just broke down. We had to stop. So anyway, I don't know how long it was after that. But within a week, I had insomnia after my son died. And so I'm sitting in my chair about 2 a.m, whatever, I don't know what time, in the middle of the morning. My dog was out with me. I was in the living room chair, recliner, and I must have dozed off a little bit and then woke up, and all these words were going in my head. And I realized they rhymed. And I thought, well, I just want to go to bed. I just want to go to sleep. I don't want this. I want to go to sleep. And so I forced my way to go back to sleep. And I probably did for a little bit. And I woke up and there were more words in my head. And this time I got smart and I said, well, I'm going to take my phone. I better get these things down, because if I write down these words, then I can forget them and go to sleep and keep my brain from stirring around. So I did. And 40 minutes later, I had a poem. First poem I'd ever written, really. I woke up the next morning and I changed a few words, but just a few words. And here was this poem. So it's called, and since then I've written, that's about 7-8 years ago. Since then I've written over 80 poems. And I found that it's God's way of talking to me about this grief and helping me through. So the poem is called In My Heart I Cry. How much are you grieving? I don't really know. The kid passed on a few years ago. I heard this question the other day. It was stunning and galling. So what can I say? I could utter it's fine since my son went away. My days forge along like a strange passion play. I still go to church and manage my job. Now and then I bike and I jog, trying so hard with each passing day to lift the thick fog that stifles my way. It envelops me still and holds me so tight, reminding me that things are not quite all right. Life does go on for the rest of us. Day after day, it surely is thus. Buck up, they all say. The pain will go away. But how can they know when I'm feeling so low if they've not been through it? It's hard to construe it. So I smile at the world and I'm good for a laugh, but in my heart I cry. So am I still mourning? Does it now really matter? The years have passed on, we've grown older and fatter. My friends all quit asking if I'm really okay. They have their own lives, never think of that day. They assume I'm much better and I try to get by, but they never observe when my tears are still nigh. Too often it seems I just numb the dull pain and stifle my screams, or have sleepless nights that halt restless dreams. So I go through the motions, smiling here, laughing there, meandering through life without further care, or so it may seem to those who weren't there. They don't understand the pains that I bear and the times that I show it, and increasingly rare, I never shed tears when others are near, but in my heart I cry.
Thank you. That's very moving and very, I'm sure. Amber, does that relate? Does that feel just right?
It does. Yeah, and I also want to say I'm so sorry for what you've been through. I know we have a little bit different ways that we've lost our children, but unless you've lost a child, it's hard to explain that pain. It really is difficult. So I'm definitely moved that you were able to take that pain and put it into something so beautiful that, I mean, it speaks to me for sure.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Just saying it helps us to understand and to feel that as well, and that, and of course it's the losses of the child, obviously, but the loss of the future, the loss of the dreams, and in both your cases, there's the like, could I have done something different? Should there be could there be some other things? Like there's a whole bunch of stuff that would go on top of the actual grief. It's not simple.
Yeah, I remember sitting in the lobby and I thought many times since, could I have done something? Could I have followed the EMT people back into the back room and seen what was going on? But I stood up and demanded to know. Could I have, there were a few warning signs. He had not been feeling well before he went to the dentist, and I should have said, you sure you want to do this? I mean, there are all kinds of things, we have this guilt. It's like, what could I have done? But as Amber said, one thing that I've thought about a lot is, and I even talked to my wife about it when we were still married, I used to have people die, friends of mine had family members die, friends in my ward, a spouse die or whatever, and I used to try to do what everybody does. I tried to give to exercise compassion, to show my sympathy, and all of these kinds of things. And I didn't realize until after Jared died that before, when I was doing that, I had no clue what it really felt like to lose a child. I had no clue whatsoever. And the reality, I think, for me, Amber may feel differently, but for me, we had people the week after, it took a week from the time he died to the funeral. And we had a whole kitchen full of food that people brought over. And it smelled so delicious. It just smelled great. And I couldn't eat a bite. I just could not force it down. I could not force myself to eat. I could not sleep. couldn't do anything like that. And I realized that basically, and people would try to say some things, and you hear the usual, well, at least you have the gospel, you know that you'll be with him again and all of that. And I just wanted to scream, I want him now. I want him back. I don't want to wait all that time. And I have realized that the best thing you can do in a situation like that is just walk up to them and give them a big hug and let them know that you care and you love them and you're sorry. That's all. You don't need to say a word.
Yeah.
I experienced it because my husband died 6 years ago now, and the things that people said and did were just, most of it was pretty useless.
We don't realize, huh?
Yeah, and I'm like you, it's different, but it's the same in that I hadn't ever realized what people were going through. You really do have to experience it to understand it.
Well, and it wasn't really insensitive per se, because they didn't want to be sensitive. They wanted to console. They wanted to do these things. And so I did recognize that and appreciate it. I think Amber wanted to say something.
Oh, I was going to say it's, I think people try their best to figure out the best way to comfort you. And I definitely had outpouring of love from the ward, from family, from friends. And I even had strangers reach out to me. Man, I remember this one gentleman sent me a beautiful letter. And like, I think he had just seen the obituary, and man, it was amazing. And I remember people that had lost a child to suicide reached out to me. And I remember one, and I can't remember who it was in particular, but someone had said, I lost my daughter 6 years ago. And I remember in my head in that moment, the only thing I thought of is, how are you still alive 6 years later without your daughter? I couldn't even fathom. I didn't want to go one more day without my son. I remember just feeling like, I can't, how are you? Anyway, it just blew my mind that she's still like moving ahead 6 years later. And here I am. It has been 4 years for me, still like moving forward. And I think Robbie said earlier that the pain is still there. It's not as intense as when it first all happens. You kind of learn that it's now just a part of you. A part of you is kind of going to be missing until we're reunited in the next life. So it's something you just learn to live with. But yeah, but definitely well-meaning people. So.
So Amber, you were talking before about the fact you've written like a little graphic about the spiral of grief. So rather than the circle of grief that we often think, and I think that's a mistake, isn't it? That people you just go around this circle and then it's all fixed.
Yeah, so it doesn't work that way for sure. And I've seen, I mean, there's a lot of different graphics I've seen about the grief cycle. But I know the first step is shock and denial. And that definitely, without a doubt, was what I went into, at least for that first week. There was so much fear, and I was definitely in shock that this was happening to me. 2 is anger. 3 is depression and detachment. 4 is dialogue and bargaining. And 5 is acceptance. And in the graphic, I've put that you're going to move from those stages all over the place. You can go from shock and denial to depression and detachment, and then to anger, and then to bargaining, and then back to anger. And so it is like this cycle that tends to spin round and round and round until you do get to that point of acceptance. And I can honestly say, even when you get to acceptance, you're still gonna have days you go back and you're angry, or you find yourself crying, like Rob said earlier. Some days you just break down and cry. And so, hopefully you're doing a little better, not going all the way back down into that dark hole when everything first happens. But there also is a lot of emotions that aren't included in the 5 stages of grief that I felt too. I have guilt, lack of interest, anxiety, fatigue, lack of trust of other people, fear, inability to focus, and just being overwhelmed. And those were all emotions I was feeling that maybe not necessarily are included in those 5 stages. And so we kind of can get stuck on some. I definitely find myself, my biggest roadblock is fear. That's still a big one for me to get past. I'm a single mom now, trying to figure out what the rest of my life's going to look like, and I'm just not sure. The uncertainty is very uncomfortable. So that's kind of where I'm at. And maybe being a woman and going through divorce when you haven't built a career and all of that, it's a bit of a scramble to be like, now what? So that's my roadblock in the grief cycle, is the fear, for sure.
There are a lot of profound statements there, Amber. I could add, and I think I didn't hear it, another element of grief is not necessarily a good one, but it's numbness, numbing ourselves. And
Sure.
a little bit like denial, but sometimes to just try to move through, you talk about getting through these things. It's one day at a time. As you know, there were days when to me it was one step at a time. Like I had to literally concentrate on, okay, I'm going to put one foot in front of the other, and then that one in front of the next one, and just move on one by one by one. And I definitely feel, as you've said, that the stages of grief concept is a total myth. It just doesn't happen. The elements are all there for sure, and we do go through those. Anger, for example, is the second one. Like I'm looking at one right now. I'm looking at a couple of psychologists who have talked about grief, and they list the same 5 stages, but in a different order. They have denial, then anger, then bargaining, then depression, then acceptance. I'm not sure either one of those is right or wrong. They're just there, and I can think of there were days, just single days, where I think denial I moved through relatively quickly. Like, he's gone, he's not coming back, there's no way. And by saying relatively quickly, I'm not talking about days, I'm talking about months. Still 3 or 4 or 5 months it took me to get over denial. But anger comes and goes. Bargaining went on for a little bit. Depression, there are days, Sunday afternoons are really hard for me for whatever reason. I've gone to church and I come home, and me growing up, Sunday afternoons were family time. And my mother lorded, if you will, lorded over our household in a very good, loving way, not in any kind of a manipulative or controlling way. She was a very loving, compassionate woman. She was the center of our household, and growing up, I felt like it was a nice, safe cocoon. And so, not having that to go home to, I actually that's been a challenge for me all my life. That Sunday afternoon thing, but particularly after my son died, and really after my wife, it's a real hard one to come home alone. But so they all come and go. Some days I can have a little bit of anger, a little bit of bargaining, a little bit of depression, and a little bit of deception or acceptance, all in the same day.
It's very true.
Oh,
Yeah.
so to me, it's like, well, I'm not going to even worry about those stages. I'm just going to move ahead with life as best I can. And
Yeah.
there we go.
You got to have, you do have to let yourself move through them,
Do.
because if you fight it and you are trying to not let those feelings come, you stay in the vicious cycle, and you're not getting to that place of acceptance very easily, because you're battling yourself. And so you do have to let yourself feel it. It's not fun, but if you give into it and let the waves of emotion come over you.
Right.
I think
In
that's
fact-
really good advice, Amber. I think that's really important for everybody to understand, is that you've got to let the feelings, you've got to feel the feelings. They're
Yeah.
all right. There's no such thing as a wrong feeling. They're all appropriate. We're going to
Yeah.
have to wrap this up.
Okay.
I really appreciate both Amber and Robert. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for coming. We will definitely put all those things in the show notes. Everybody remember to go on to Facebook so that you can see further details and further notes and see those poems and things. I've also got some things that I've worked on with grief. Remember exactly what Amber was saying, that feeling of like, who am I now? What am I going to do? That's exactly the type of coaching that I do, Amber, just by the way.
Awesome. I could use that.
For anybody else, that's exactly, because I had those same questions of like, well, who am I now? What do I do
Yeah.
with my life now?
And even I think anyone who's gone through a divorce or widowed or something as horrific as what you two have gone through, I'll go through that of now I have to redefine myself basically, and start not necessarily over. Sometimes it's worse than over, right? Because you have all the wounds and you have to find a way to restart. So
But yeah, it's not just sort of like getting on with your life. You've got to transform it. It's a new life. Despite the fact that you don't want it, it's a new life.
yeah.